Hey, what is up, everybody? Good evening. If you're on the East Coast, I'm Risa Morimoto, your host. You're watching Modern Aging, a place where we chat about innovative and holistic ways to optimize our health and well-being as we age. You are watching the last session, session 6 of our mindfulness-based workshop. Today, we are going to be talking about compassion and presence, managing now while also preparing for what's next, which kind of seems to be a nice way to round out this series with our teacher and guide, Michelle Maldonado. If you've been with us for sessions 1 through 5, you know that we talked about it's not okay to be okay. We talked about moving from fear to empowerment. We talked about embracing the present, embracing the now, psychological safety, how to connect during times of physical distancing. And then what's today, Wednesday? Oh my God, all the days are together and molded together. Saturday, we talked about habits and creating routine and ready resources. And today we're going to round that all out nicely. We are also going to be developing a course based on mindfulness and the work that Michelle has been doing. We're going to dig deeper and have new information as well. So if you're interested in your input and letting us know what you'd like to learn more about, please email us at info@thisismodernaging.com. Just a little bit about our teacher, Michelle Maldonado, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time. She's the founder and CEO of Lucencia. It is a company that helps leaders with mindful transformation. She's also a certified mindfulness teacher as well as a certified emotional intelligence teacher. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more today. And you can check her out at lucencia.com. I just want to give a nice little shout out to Kim and Michelle. Hi, Joyce and Angela. Thank you so much for joining us today. So let's bring on Michelle. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, good evening. How are you, Risa?
I'm good. It's Wednesday. The day is
It's
done.
hump day.
Although I have to say, I think every day kind of feels like Wednesday or Friday or Monday.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what day it really is half the time, but in any event, I'm glad to be here. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to those who have been with us for previous sessions, and welcome for the first time to those who are just joining us newly. It's so wonderful to have you here with us. And so today's session, as Risa said, is really the last in the series, and we're looking at it as sort of pulling everything together. So we're going to be referencing things from the first 5 sessions, but don't worry if you didn't attend them. It'll be pretty intuitive, and you can always go back and take a look and also download the resources that are available for you. So why don't we get started? If we look at the first slide today.
Okay, hold on.
That up. Yep. I see Angie. Hello. Ani. Hello. Patrick. Hi. Oh, Kim. Hi. Welcome, Kim. So glad that you could join us.
Okay. You're there. Presence, yes?
Excellent. So, yes. So when we talk tonight, there are going to be a couple of definitions we're going to review because they're really important for us to anchor in as we're trying to manage all of this stuff that's happening right now, and at the same time trying to plan, prepare, and create what it is that we wish to experience and to receive next. So the first thing I want to talk about is this notion of presence. And if we borrow a definition, some of you who have been with us in some of the earlier sessions might even recognize this definition. Paying attention to what's happening in the present moment in the mind, body, and external environment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. So that is actually the formal definition used in the UK for mindfulness, you may recall from our previous session. But it's also a way to describe what happens when you are fully present. And when you are fully present, that begins to really shift, shape, and influence the quality and nature of your presence in any given moment. And whether you're by yourself, you're with another person or a group of people, our presence has ripple effects. It has this sort of almost invisible quality as well. Risa, have you ever been around somebody where they haven't even said a word to you, but it's just like, wow, they feel like they're really nice. You can't really put something concrete around it. You ever been around people, or maybe the opposite?
I know. Well, both, I have to say, to be honest. But no, yeah, and you don't know why. It's also, I mean, honestly, it was kind of like that with you, right? We haven't known each other that long, but immediately we kind of just understood each other, or
yes,
we knew we had the same values, or.
I didn't even have to pay you to say that. That she was not paid to say that, everybody.
It is true.
But yes, it's true. Sometimes you just click and there's just a vibe. There's something. And there is something to be said about how people feel in your presence. And it is your presence that makes them feel that way. There are a lot of things that go into what cultivates presence. Now, up until today, we have looked at a number of tools, some brain science, some practices that could help us become more aware of ourself, others, and surrounding, the emotions that show up in our body, and all kinds of things. So these are practices, tips, and tools. But in order to take all of that and manage now and prepare for what's next, what we want to do is actually give you and offer a framework that you can use to help pull all of this together. And you may see up there in the next slide the emotional intelligence as a vehicle, as a framework. Is anybody, you can kind of put it in the chat, has anybody ever heard of the term emotional intelligence before? Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to you, Risa?
Hold on. I'm kind of screwing this up. Have I heard? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I think emotional intelligence is actually more, for me, I value that more than actual intellectual intelligence.
There is something about somebody who is emotionally intelligent that makes you feel a certain way. And you may not necessarily know the term, but I can promise you, if you've been in the presence of people who have very deep emotional intelligence, you'll know it because you'll feel it. And if you've been in the presence of someone who absolutely does not, you'll know that too.
No, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. It's funny. My husband is probably one of the top people that I know has very high emotional intelligence. Like, people always remember him. Always. You know, it's like, he's so nice. He's just so nice. He's just so genuine. And, you know, it's amazing, you know, and we call it the Pauly G. When you're doing the Pauly G, you know that you're doing something good, right?
Pauly G. Yes. I see a couple of people here, and Paul's saying EQ. Yes, you may actually be familiar with this term as either EI or EQ, as the emotional intelligence quotient, just like you hear with IQ, the intelligence quotient. So there are a number of ways people reference this. But in essence, what it is a body of sort of skill sets and domains that help you navigate life. And there are 4 key domains, and I've kind of lumped some of them together here into 3 to kind of give us an understanding of how it touches on our presence. But in the formal work, there are 4 domains. There's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And in the diagram you see on the slide, the self-awareness and the social awareness have kind of been merged together because when I talk about the awareness pieces, I cascade it. So it's self, others, and surroundings. So those two are a little bit. This
says mindful awareness.
Yes. Okay. I call it mindful awareness, but it's awareness of self, so that'd be self-awareness, others, which is social awareness, and then surroundings is an additional element. Because I think I've mentioned this before, that this awareness can't be in a vacuum. The 3 always happen together. Unless you're by yourself, but many times when you're by yourself, you're thinking about others. So there's something there with respect to others. So here's how it all works. When we're trying to navigate the present moment, we really want to anchor and deepen our awareness of self, others, and surroundings. So we know from our discussions around mindfulness that having sort of your focused attention be on a particular object, for example. And when we practice, sometimes we make that the breath. But guess what? When you're in a conversation with someone, that person that you're in conversation with is the object of your attention. So you bring mindful awareness to that person in the conversation. So think about a time, for example, where you had a conversation with someone and they're kind of looking all around. They're not looking you in the eye. They're looking down. They might be shuffling some papers. They might be on their phone. They're not engaged. They're not fully present in the conversation. And you can feel what that's like to engage with someone in a conversation who isn't really there. In contrast, you're in conversation with someone, their eyes are sort of locked on you, not in a freaky kind of way, but just a very engaged, attentive way. And they are listening, they're not interrupting, and you feel heard. And not only do you often feel heard, but you feel valued, you feel seen, and you feel comfortable finding your voice in those moments. So that is very, very important first to have that anchor and awareness around those three pillars. And that's the first step in emotional intelligence. So you cannot, by the way, develop any of the other emotional intelligence capacities in any kind of meaningful way if your self-awareness pillar isn't built. Because if you're not self-aware, then how could you possibly leverage that to be aware of others or other things or what's in your body or what's your quality of mind, your habits of mind? So that is core and foundational. And it is the domain or the skill set upon which all the other emotional intelligence domains are built.
It's funny because I feel like some people feel like they are self-aware, but they're not.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
You might be onto something there.
But I mean, it's a real difficult skill to master, to have self-awareness and then to be able to be aware of others and to listen intently and to, I don't know how innate that is for people. I think that's I think it's within us, but we really have to nurture it.
I do think that, we do have it within us, but the world teaches us otherwise. They teach us that we're taught to strive and we're taught to achieve and acquire. And that doesn't always allow spaciousness and room for us to listen. But you do raise a good point. And in fact, in January of 2018, there was the results of a research study came out, Risa and friends tonight, that asked of how many of all the people they surveyed, in research that that said they were self-aware, how many of them actually were? What percentage? So if you want to put in the chat function down there, and while Risa maybe takes her best guess, of all the people who were polled that say, yes, I am self-aware, when the research was done, what percentage of that do you think were actually self-aware?
I'm maybe half.
50%.
I think 50%. No? Yeah?
Well, I don't know. I want to see what does anybody else think down here in the chat box. I want to see if you're as generous.
Really? That's so depressing. Wow.
Okay. Well, I don't see anybody entering anything. However, the research showed that 15 to 20% of people who think they're self-aware are actually self-aware.
What?
Yes. So, but let me explain a little bit why.
Wow.
Normally, when people talk about self-awareness, Kathy, thank you, 27%. You are the closest. They are only looking at the self-awareness piece. So some people are very good. Thank you, Jane, 30%. Kim, 37, 20%. Robert, all 90 said so. Five calls us 5%. So here's what they found is that when you're talking about self-awareness, a lot of people think it's just awareness of what's happening in your mind and your body. But self-awareness is your awareness of yourself and your awareness of how others perceive you, how others are responding to you. And that's the piece where people fell down on the job, so to speak, where they just weren't aware that they were rubbing people the wrong way, they weren't engaged with them, or they were just completely disconnected or whatever it was. So that's why I always, when I look at awareness, it's multifaceted, because otherwise we start to make these silos of awareness, and we don't live that way. So we have to learn how to connect like these concentric circles, these layers of awareness to enable our capacity to be fully present and to meet what also is showing up.
Wow, that's
So
fascinating.
yeah, but you were right on it when you called it. Um, and so the other thing about this and looking at the framework of emotional intelligence, once you get the awareness piece down, the other that's it, intrapersonal, just like social awareness is. I mean, sorry, self management is. Now, self management is the next step, and that's the second most important one because as we're fielding everything that's coming towards us or that's arising within us, we have to figure out how to respond. And I call it response hyphen ability as opposed to responsibility. It's our ability to skillfully respond as opposed to knee jerk react. And so this self-management skill is built on a bed of self-awareness. Okay, I notice this is the quality of, my head trash, as Daniel Goleman in his program uses, in his coaching certification program. What's that internal narrative and critic saying? And how am I challenging that, transforming that story? Or I might feel a certain way, but I know that this particular behavior or action does not serve a higher good or the best outcome. So I've got to manage myself so I don't act impulsively.
Mm.
So those two are, say, kind of like the fuel in the car to keep us going. And then the relationship management and the social awareness pieces that's the domain that's interpersonal. Those are the domains that help us interact with people in very healthy and skillful ways. So if we're aware, we're properly self-managed, we are navigating our relationships in a healthy way, then we have a solid framework to pull in all those tips and practices we used in the first set of series to inform the nature and quality of our presence and our impact. And that is really important because, as you can see on the outside of the circle, is the habits of mind. We've talked about growth mindset and how we can kind of get in our own way. But when we do these sort of focused awareness, mindful awareness, these breath practices, these other tools, it helps to cultivate a really positive mindset that can then allow us to set a really positive intention and identify a purpose that we have and that we want to engage and execute on to be able to take wise action. Now, here's the thing that I will say that we often have a challenge with is that, we may have the best intentions to do something, to do something for someone or to create something or to make an improvement. And then the intention doesn't match the impact. The impact might be 180 degrees different than what you intended. And so it may ruffle feathers, hurt feelings, cause frustration or anger. And you may not be aware if you haven't cultivated your self-awareness. The second thing is we always have to remember that intention doesn't match impact. So we are invited to continuously assess, is our intention matching our impact? And if it is not, then we have to sort of go back. We may have to have a conversation to clarify. We may have to apologize. We may have to fine-tune a plan or the steps we take and be gracious about it, because the human nature part of us is that we always seem to judge people by their impact on us, but we want to be judged by our intention.
I think that's, yes, for all mothers who have teenage children, this especially goes out to all of us.
Yes.
That we have good intentions, but sometimes our impact is not what we intended.
So true. And this helps, this comes out a lot of times with people who are really trying to do something good. Oh, I can fix this. And we all have blind spots. And so, because we don't know our blind spots, we really have to always continuously assess and then, leverage our community and those trusted advocates in our community to help us stay on track while we're managing everything that's present so that we can put the pieces in place to prepare for what's coming or what's next. And so that's a framework that we can use. But the other thing to remember, and you may remember from, I think it was either 2 sessions ago, the sort of empathy compassion conversation. And none of this can be done without a tightly woven in sort of layering of empathy and compassion. And just as a refresher, the way that we define compassion here is multi-layered, just like everything else, because nothing is just straight. It has these 3 components: the ability to experience and understand what others feel, while simultaneously maintaining a clear discernment about what's your stuff and what's the other person's stuff. Now, that right there is what many people define as empathy. And so adding compassion is this action part. And compassion can also be described as empathy in action. And by the way, mindfulness emotional intelligence can also be described, if I can borrow from a good friend of mine, Shana Hammond, that emotional intelligence is mindfulness in action. So if you think about how do I apply these skills in action, you think about emotional intelligence and you think about compassion, and you've got the action element. Because it's not enough just to sit in your mind or sit in your body with the knowledge. You've got to apply it in the world. And so empathy in action, to apply it, you ask the question, sort of what would be of service, and you take ethical action. And asking what would be of service also is a way to get us out of the flurry of stress and crisis, when you can still your mind enough to ask the question, what would be of service? What would truly help sort of bring about the highest good and outcome? So that definition would be sort of part of the mix when you're using the emotional intelligence framework. And also remembering that compassion piece, there's an external facing view, that's how you relate it to other people. But then there's the inward facing piece, that it's self-compassion. And we've talked about that as well. And if we look at the work of Dr. Kristen Neff out of University of Texas in Austin, she defines self-compassion in this way, that it has 3 key components in order to be present. And that is mindfulness, and, sort of being aware of those multiple layers, and then common humanity. And this is an important one, because a lot of times we can feel down, we can feel isolated, we can feel like what we're going through, we're the only ones going through it. And the reality is whatever we're going through, it's that scenario as expressed through us in our life circumstances, but it is not unique in the sense that so many people across the human diaspora have their own versions of that. So we are in a common humanity. You are not alone. There are many people who understand, experience the same kinds of challenges, successes, achievements, and suffering. And then the last part is making sure to apply a lens of self-kindness in with it. Because there's, when we're managing what's happening now and trying to prepare for what's next, it's incredible. It can be overwhelming. And there's a question, though, and as we're talking about this for a few minutes, I'd love for people to, if you're comfortable putting in the chat box of when we think about preparing for what's next, because the managing now is solidifying the foundation. But we're not going back to normal, right? The world as we know it has shifted. So, but we can create a new normal. And the reason I say we're not going back to normal is because so much has changed. And the reality is that normal, what used to be, needed some work. It wasn't that great in many respects for many people around the world. And so if you had the opportunity, which P.S. you do, we all do, to create a new kind of reality that starts to invite us to work differently, to interact differently, to engage with devices differently and people differently, to do business differently, what would that look like? And as you're putting the pieces of the foundation in now for what's now, you start to see a picture emerge for what is next. And you have power and authority and creative license, like an artist, to start to influence and fill in and co-create what's next. What do you want to be different for you and start to take action to make that happen.
That makes it less daunting and makes it actually more exciting, right?
Yes. It'd be like an adventure, and I think you're welcome, Barbara. I think that life can be really hard. And there are moments where we feel really connected to people, and then there are moments where we feel very alone. And if we don't remind ourselves of these things, we can get lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always say, why not get folks involved in your life in a way that helps you be your best you? And that's easier said than done, I know. And then when you think about compassion, you think about what does it look like? So this is a question I love to ask people. So Risa, when you think of compassion, I know we've had some definitions, but when you think about it in action, what does compassion look like to you?
I live in New York City, so I feel like compassion is seeing the people who are technically unseen, whether it's, giving some money to a homeless person, or seeing somebody who's hurt and stopping, or noticing, if somebody, what most people I think would probably ignore, you don't ignore, and you kind of go towards it. And I don't know whether you sit and listen, or you try to help, or you just try to engage for me, and my family will attest to this, like, I have certain soft spots. Animals is definitely one of them. That I cannot, there are certain things I can't ignore, right? I think everybody probably has something that that their compassion barometer, maybe changes, or but for me, I think, but there's also can be compassion towards, like larger issues, that not necessarily like a one-on-one type of thing, but and I feel like on a whole, we need, as a society, as a global society, I feel like we really need work on that. I feel like the way things were just so much more rush. And, I need to get to my goal. I need to go do this. I need to do that. And so this has given us an opportunity to pause, right? And to think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that important, sacred, purposeful pause. So much can happen in the pause, and we're seeing it even in things that you're sharing. Those are the kinds of things that happen when we pause. We notice more, we take kinder action. But do you think compassion is just about being nice?
Yes. No.
I think I would say yes and.
Yes and.
Yes and. See, Anita, social justice. I'm looking at some of the comments right now. And I love Kathy, I love that you're using your extra time to reevaluate, prioritize, and determine which parts of normal you'll choose to return to. How empowering that statement is. Which parts I choose to return to. That's really, really beautiful. Yes, Barbara, with the fully present with more global issues as well. Absolutely. And here's the thing about compassion that we have to also be mindful of, to be careful of, to notice, is that compassion can look like kindness, but it also can not look like kindness. So let me give you a little parable. And some of you may have heard this story before. There once was a man, there once was this man that was sitting on his deck. He was outside, and he noticed that this butterfly was trying to get out of the chrysalis, and it was struggling. And he looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, I can see the wings. It's just so beautiful. Let me just help. And he began to very delicately take his fingers and pull apart the chrysalis and to allow the butterfly to emerge. And the butterfly did emerge. However, it was unable to fly. Because in its struggle, the purpose of the butterfly's struggle exiting out of the chrysalis was to remove the things from its wings that weigh it down. And because it didn't have to do that, its wings were too heavy and the butterfly couldn't fly and eventually died. I know it's a very sad story, but the
oh my God,
is, so sorry. But then it left a whole bunch of other ones and they all flew away and it was all happy ending. I don't know. So, but the point is, a lot of times when we're trying to help, what we think compassion is, that's why you have to ask what would be of service, because sometimes compassion can look fierce. It can look very strong and not necessarily gentle. And anyone who has parents or has relatives who may be dealing with addiction issues, challenges, or health conditions that people are struggling with, if you thought compassion was just about being nice, you might end up being an enabler. Sometimes compassion looks fierce. Sometimes you have to let a little struggle happen so somebody can walk, run, and fly, including yourself.
That's amazing. That's so true.
Yeah, and we see this in the workplace a lot too. A lot of times, if you're if somebody's struggling and you want to go and fix it for them, the thing that sometimes compassion just looks like holding safe space, like being somebody's safety net, so they can try and they can learn. They don't have to crash and burn and be humiliated, but sometimes I'm using the word struggle, but sometimes in that discomfort is where we grow. And so just keep in mind when you think about compassion that it doesn't always look pretty. But when you're staying in integrity, you're asking what would be of service, and you're looking at the highest outcome, and you're keeping in the sort of elements of humanity and mindfulness and kindness, the risk of doing damage is much more minimized than not. You're more likely to have a compassionate vehicle that helps yield a positive outcome.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's really important to remember, especially with it's kind of like with the whole parent-child thing, right? With intention and result and compassion and yeah.
Yes. And, it's interesting too. I don't know how many folks work in an office setting or are stay-at-home parents or not working or work from home. But here's the thing too, is that when we think about how do we help others, we have to give space for growth. We have to give space for learning without judgment. And being able to do that is a gift. It's not only a gift for the person in your presence, but it's a gift for you because that's your self-management piece. And
not to judge.
Start to build that. Not to judge, not to knee-jerk react, whether it's to go run and fix it for somebody instead of allowing them to learn how to do it themselves. One of my colleagues has a podcast, had a podcast series years ago, and I think he still does. And he had one called sort of Ask, Don't Tell. And the notion was if you ask more questions than you tell somebody what to do, you will teach them compassionately how to learn what it is they need to learn.
Oh,
now,
well.
Having said that, I do recognize that's kind of best of possible worlds. There are times where it's crisis, it's urgent, and we need to be directive or we need to be sort of very quick. I'm not talking about that. There are always exceptions, but in general, sort of taking this approach to it helps us to really embrace what's happening now so we can more effectively and skillfully manage it as we co-create for what's next. Okay, yes, I see that, Kathy. Also known as tough love.
Yes.
Right.
I had a lot of tough love in my family, so I am all about that.
Yeah, I think people of certain generations, I think we could all say that. So, yes. So I would say, compassion can be gentle and sweet and kind and endearing, but it also can be strong and empowering. And it's always empowering, but also look fierce. And don't be afraid that expression of it is less compassionate than something that looks softer and gentler. Okay. All right, so we also looked at a couple of different practices, and I just want to go through one practice that can be helpful. So when we think about what do we want to create next and what we're managing now, a lot of emotions can come up. We can feel anxious, we can feel fearful, we might even feel excited or have anticipation, or more likely than not, we may just run the spectrum of emotions because there's so much going on. And so I think that in any moment, we can use a practice that we can just take a purposeful pause and plop a practice in to help ground us when we're managing what's now or when we're thinking about what's next. Now, before I share with you this practice, I want to clarify that because you're thinking about what's next or planning for what's next, it doesn't mean that you're not fully present. It doesn't mean that you're not being mindful. What we're inviting or asking is that whatever it is that you're doing, that you bring your full attention, your full 360 presence to whatever it is. So if in the moment you are planning something that's to take place in the future, then you are fully in that planning. You are fully in that brainstorm or that creating or that innovating, whatever it is. So just know that it's not so much what you're thinking about as to how you're meeting what you're thinking about. Mm-hmm. And I see that Angela says the word grace, and actually grace is the acronym for the practice that I'm going to suggest that people do to help them. They're feeling like they really need to kind of ground. And if you tuned into a previous session, you remember another acronym was RAIN, RAIN. And this one, Grace, this was created by amazing teacher, Roshi Joan Halifax, who it just does a lot of work with death and dying and compassion towards end of life. And her practices really help all of us, regardless of what stage of life we're in. And so I always love to borrow from her really heartfelt work. But the GRACE acronym, and I love it because GRACE is easy to remember. And even if you can't remember all the words that come, if you take a pause, take a breath, and you just say the word grace, that alone is just very soothing and settling. If you can remember the pieces of what GRACE stands for, that anchors it in and provides even more support for you. So GRACE, as you can see, stands for this. The G is for gathering your attention. Because remember, attention is where the awareness gets generated. So we're always going to go back to, where's your attention? Because that is what you're bringing awareness to. And so we want to take a moment in whatever we're experiencing and just gather our attention. And then recall our intention. And you remember for a couple of slides ago, when we looked at the EI framework or the EQ framework, we were looking at intention. And intention matters because intention and purpose help guide what we're going to do and what our destination is. It's the what and the how. So the intention is how we wish to show up and what we want to do. And the purpose is also like our final destination. We want this outcome. We're doing it for this reason. So we want to recall our intention. And it's a good way to remind ourselves, is that intention, is that impact I'm seeing, is that matching what I'm intending? So you ask yourself in the moment what they are. And then attuning yourself to yourself and others. That's that checking in. A couple of sessions ago, I think the first session we did, the emotional awareness. We looked to see where emotions and sensations show up in the body that give us information. So do a check-in. How am I feeling inside? What's the narrative? What's the sort of stuff running around in my head? And checking to see those around me. How are they responding? How do they seem? And then considering what will serve. That brings us all the way from sympathy, empathy, into the realm of compassion. What will serve? And once you ask that question, it begins, as I've said before, kind of clearing the clutter, and you start to see some spaciousness emerge so that you can then take ethical sort of action. to close whatever that is. So grace is a wonderful, easy way to ground yourself in the moment, especially if you are really trying to pause all that's happening now as you create something specific for what's next. Did you want to say something, Risa?
No, I was just thinking about it. I mean, do you wait until a situation arises and then you think about grace and you kind of go through the steps? Or is it you're sitting quietly and as you think about your future or whatever it may be, then you think about grace? Or maybe you can use it for both circumstances. But
I would say yes to both. Because the thing about all of this, these are all mindfulness practices and tools really that we're threading throughout all of these sessions. And you don't have to be in a bad spot to be mindful or to bring attention.
I feel like people have it, right.
Yes. Yeah, I think we've mentioned this before, is that all of this is for whatever might be present. The good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So if you are celebrating because you just achieved something that's your heart's desire, use grace, use rain, like really feel into what celebration feels like in your body. What does your mind say when you are celebrating something? Does it minimize your contribution or does it celebrate your contribution? I mean, you can use this for any circumstance, any situation. And if you can't get through all of them, that's okay. You can use the pieces that you can in the moment that helps you.
It's like training. Yeah.
Yes.
It's mental exercises, right? To kind of give yourself the time to do that, right? I feel like sometimes we just kind of jump because we feel like we have no time or we feel like we don't have, I feel like this is a great time to train ourselves and train our minds to do things like this so that it becomes automatic. I don't know. I'm assuming this sort of thing is like automatic with you. Eventually.
Well, I mean, some days I'm human, so some days it feels automatic, and other days I'm like, what was that again? Because, everything happens in context. When everything's going great, you feel like things are smooth, like a well-oiled machine. And then when everything is not going great, and it seems like everything is taking longer or is going wrong, sometimes the practices actually are so valuable then because they help bring us out of that kind of mindset to say, okay, yep, that actually is happening. That is true. However, here's what we're going to do. It helps you be able to kind of step outside of it and not be so embroiled in it that you can't see clearly. And the other thing to do here that is really helpful, and I, over the years I've had a kind of a love-hate affair with journaling, but I notice that when I'm really trying to create something or I'm really trying to process something, those two in particular, journaling is very, very helpful. And in this particular session, we're talking about like creating what's next, sort of how do we do that? And journaling helps there are three things that happen when you want to create something new around envisioning. And the first is kind of formulating it in your mind and getting clear that way and then writing it down. And then the third step is telling somebody. So you hear yourself say it out loud and somebody else hears you say it out loud. So you've thought about it, you've written about it, and you've said it out loud. The three together are very, very powerful.
And scary and powerful, yes.
And they help concretize things, And the other beautiful thing that happens out of that is, you have to be cautious sometimes of who you share stuff with. But many times when you're sharing with somebody trusted, when somebody hears what's inside of you that's waiting to be birthed, they want to help. And all of a sudden, you find support and resources that you couldn't even imagine.
That's 100%.
That's why those three steps are important. Yeah. Totally. Okay. So we are at time. And before I turn it back to Risa, I just want to say I've had such a blast working on these series with you, Risa, and everybody who has joined. You've been amazing with the input and the questions and the comments. And I hope that you have found some helpful tips and tools and practices to take away and practice with You don't have to boil an ocean. Just, even if you just take one or two things and practice with them, start small and then expand from there, play with it, fine tune them all and be okay with massaging them so that they work for you. And so with that, I just want to say thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Risa.
I feel like it's graduation or something. No, this was so awesome, Michelle. I mean, I encourage you to look at Michelle's website, lucencia.com, which is LUCENSCIA.com. Actually, let me just put on. And if you want to get more Michelle love, Michelle teachings, we are developing a course and we'd love to have your input. You can email us at it's actually info@thisismodernaging.com. The website is thisismodernaging.com, even though the company is called Modern Aging. But anyway, if you want to have the downloads, actually, Michelle, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the downloads. For each session, Michelle has been so generous to give us some downloads. So it's either articles or meditations, and this is a combination of both for this session. And you can go to that URL to get those downloads. Do you want to share what that is?
The one today in particular, it actually breaks down the grace practice and explains each piece so that you have fuller context. And then it ends with, the last part is a link to a meditation by Joan Halifax that is, I think, really pleasant and enjoyable. So hopefully that is supportive and helpful for you.
You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Thanks for participating in the chat and everything. This has been an amazing experience for me as well. So I'm really, truly grateful. So thank you, Michelle. And thank you, everybody. Angela, Paul, Angie, Kathy, Anita, Barbara, Annie. I mean, seriously, it's been pretty awesome. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Have a great week.
Enjoy, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers.
That's right. Happy Mother's Day.